How you feeling? You got John Riggs here. You check out these great video game stores that happen to be in your town, hopefully, or maybe you go to a video game convention and you're overwhelmed with the selection. Now, you've already heard of the top picks. You've heard of the Castlevanias, the Mega Mans, but what about those other games that you just kind of pass through? It's like, well, I've never heard of this game, doesn't look like anything, and you skip over it. Just some polite recommendations if you don't know what else to pick up. So in this new video series, I'm giving you one recommendation for 10 different consoles. And we're starting with the classic Game Boy. Gremlins 2: The New Batch. If you've played this on the NES, the Game Boy version is very different. Not better or worse, but different. Now, I'm more nostalgic for the NES version, but the Game Boy version plays very well. It's a side-scrolling platformer. Now, you don't natively have a weapon, unfortunately, but oftentimes you will find a weapon pretty close near the beginning of these stages. And there are also other environmental things that you can activate to also use as weaponry in this game. You do not need to have watched the film, it wouldn't hurt, but you'll still have a great time with Gremlins 2: The New Batch for the Game Boy Classic. Now, this is your black and white Game Boy. If you happen to have a Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, this will work on those consoles too. There are boss fights in this game, something to look out for. Little bonus mini stages as well. And just a fun time if you're looking for a fun new platformer for your classic Game Boy. Maybe this is one you've skipped over. Check out Gremlins 2. Now, moving on to the Super Nintendo, might want to check out Super Bowling. Now, I understand this is like, we're like, what, a bowling game? Trust me, my friend Joe pointed this game out to me. It's actually really good. It's made from American Technos. Yeah, the people who brought you Double Dragon brought you this great, amazing arcade-style bowling game. This was kind of during a time when you had games like Baseball Stars or whatever that golf game was, where it's like, yeah, it's a sports game, but there's like a lot of people playing it because it's kind of like cartoony and has an arcade feel to it. Easy to just pick up and play, too. You can add the slice, you know, choose your power. You can hit the button at the right time to, you know, arch the ball a little bit, spin the ball a little bit. What a fantastic, fantastic idea for a bowling game. Bowling games do not need to be difficult. They just need to be pick up and play and have fun and play as you need. You're already ready to go. You're waiting for your kids to put their shoes on. You can pop this in and play for a round and you'll be good. A couple of different gameplay modes as well, including this golf one, which is interesting. It goes by pars. Well, here's a couple of pins, so it's a par 2. Can you knock them both down in 2 rounds? Well, Super Bowling for the Super Nintendo provides that. Might want to check it out. Expanding onto your NES selection, well, the Guardian Legend is one that everybody should have in their collection. A couple of different gameplay styles in this game, too. It starts out as an overworld shooter, like an overhead shooter. You know, just like a vertical scrolling shooter. And pretty cool. Graphics are great, music's great and everything. You know, animation is fine and stuff like that. Yeah, that's pretty neat. But then the fun of it becomes a maze game when you kind of transform into this warrioress. And then you have that overworld maze style where you're going around collecting items and, you know, moving on from there. Any game that provides multiple gameplay styles, I tend to gravitate towards because you're never too bored to stick with one thing over and over and over again. It won't be as monotonous, and I love that. And the Guardian Legend, to a lot of NES collectors, is one of the best. It's definitely worth checking out. You got your Sega Genesis ready to roll? Well, what about Two Crude Dudes? A, it's a fun name to say, and B, it's a fun game to play. Now, Two Crude Dudes from Data East, slightly tied to Bad Dudes. Did you ever play Bad Dudes in the arcade? Well, this may be from the same universe. It is a 2-player simultaneous game. You play as these just stock muscle guys who are just beating people up, and you can pick up so many items in this game to use as weaponry, including the enemies themselves. That's pretty neat. If you're looking for a great 2-player couch co-op, not a bad thing to have in your collection. Still a fun 1-player game, better as a 2-player game. Two Crude Dudes, I had a lot of fun with this game. And it's not going to break the bank or anything like that either. So if you're looking for Sega Genesis games, looking for another beat 'em up, might want to check out Two Crude Dudes. TurboGrafx-16 is one of my favorite consoles of all time, and Pac-Land was one I had a lot of fun with. Might be a little confusing at first because there's two modes. There's a button mode and a lever mode. Well, in the arcade, you had buttons that you would press, much like you would hit the button to jump. Well, in this game, you hit the button to either run left or the other button to run right, and then there's a jump. You can have that same arcade experience at home with that feature, or if you do the lever mode, it's just going to be your D-pad left and right will move you left and right, and then your button will jump. That's fine too. Either way you look at it, that's usually the way I play it. I just play with the D-pad. It's still a fun experience. It's just a fun, cartoony, platformy, it's not really so much platform so much, but just that fun style. And it happens to feature Pac-Man based on the cartoon. Now, there was an animated Pac-Man series in the 80s, believe it or not. Different levels have different gimmicks as well. So when you see a certain level, you're like, oh, I know what this level is going to feature. This level will feature this thing that I need to worry about, or this other thing I need to worry about. I'm a big fan of Pac-Land, TurboGrafx-16. Some of those cards are getting pretty pricey. Pac-Land is traditionally one of the cheaper games to pick up. So if you happen to see a Pac-Land laying around, even loose, might grab it for yourself. Atari 2600, well, I grew up with the Atari 2600 and I love it still. And Dragonfire, again, a couple of different gameplay styles. You have to invade the castle. So first off, you're going from castle to castle. Watch out for the breaths of fire. There's either going to be a top one or a bottom one. You can duck under the high ones, jump under the low ones. And then once you're in the castle keep, then there's the dragon protecting its treasure. You have to run out of the door, grab all the treasure as much as you can, and then once you got all the treasure, you move through the door and go on to the next area. The more you play this game, the faster the dragon moves. The more you play this game, the more fireballs the dragon's gonna blow at you. Super fun, highly addicting. How far can you go in this game? I'm a huge fan of Dragonfire, and if you're looking for a great 2600 game, this is the one to grab. How about a fun puzzle game that nobody talks about for Game Boy Color? Yogi Bear Great Balloon Blast. You're like, what? A Yogi Bear game? Excuse me, what? Trust me on this game's pretty amazing. Choose your character, you can do that up front. And how this game plays, imagine, oh, how do I describe this? Imagine a Puyo Space Invaders hybrid. Something like that. You match 3, a minimum of 3, that'll eliminate those colors, and then the platform or the balloons keep dropping further and further and further down. So you have to keep working at it to make sure you eliminate all the balloons before they move all the way down to where you are. It's a great puzzle game, and not a lot of people talk about this. Kind of flew under the radar when it comes to Game Boy Color. So if you're looking for some great Game Boy Color games with an unlimited gameplay style, I do love my puzzle games. Might want to check this one out. The game is called Yogi Bear Great Balloon Blast. Believe it or not, a fun puzzle game featuring Yogi Bear. Why not? Sega Master System, look no further than Quartet, one of the best. One of my favorite arcade games. Unfortunately, for the Master System, you can only do a 2-player game, which I know defeats the purpose of it being called Quartet. However, in the arcade, it's called Quartet. What are you gonna do about it? It has that old school Sega charm that I absolutely love. The levels in this game are not very long, and that's not a bad thing. But each level, not very long, you move your way through, lots of items you can pick up. You have kind of a health bar, other things you can do, creative enemies, great soundtrack, and you're looking for the key. Now, every stage will have a boss, and when you defeat the boss, they'll drop the key. And that key will open the door to move you to the next stage. Simple by design and concept, but man, what a fun experience this is. One of the better Master System games out there, for sure. Great arcade game. If you happen to see it like in a retro arcade, definitely play some Quartet. And I love me this game. For the Sega Master System, done very well. You got a PlayStation 1 laying around. Well, one of the best ones was one of the earliest released games, and that's a game called Loaded. Now, I love me Loaded, especially when it first came out. You choose your crazy, crazy character. This game will feature blood, and so watch out for that. Absolutely fantastic soundtrack. And not like Gauntlet, but it has that Gauntlet view, that kind of overhead style. And you have to defeat all the enemies. Well, you're picking up these key cards that will open up these certain doors. to make you move on through the stages and through the next stages. A lot of enemies will start showing up trying to get at you. You just got to get at them first with, you know, whatever weapon you happen to be using depending on the character you selected. I prefer this cowboy guy. This is the guy I always played as. Yeah, but however you want to play it, it's all you, buddy. The game's called Loaded. It's for the PlayStation 1. Might want to check it out. For the soundtrack alone, for the Sega CD, what about the game Hook? Now, they have Hook for the Super Nintendo, they have Hook for the Sega Genesis, and this is that same one. There is a Hook for the NES, we're not talking about that one, that's a completely different game. This one features voice. Because it's on a CD, you actually have voice samples.
Maggie, it's time for bed.
Daddy, is Grandma Wendy the real Wendy?
Maggie, that's ridiculous.
Now, not the same actors from the movie, but still something that the Genesis and Super Nintendo ones didn't provide. When you're playing the game, yeah, it's going to play the same way, but very similarly to the Genesis and Super Nintendo game. You get the soundtrack. Because it's on CD, you get the CD quality soundtrack with this game Hook. And Hook, the movie, fantastic soundtrack. I'm a big fan of the film too, but to me that just made it that much better. And to me, music and sound is such an important part of any video game of any type, of any kind, of any era. So you can have a fun game like Hook, but with that CD quality symphonic soundtrack, even better. And the game itself, if you're not familiar with Hook in the first place, even for Super Nintendo or Genesis, it's a pretty fun game. It's not bad. It's a pretty fun game. The optimal version for me is the Sega CD version. There's even little cutscenes between stages that give you a little film. Now, trust me, back in the day, this was mind-blowing. Even having something like this, it's like, oh my god, it's like you're watching a movie. Well, that's just how we felt back then. Very fun game, and a very fun game to see and play, and especially here. So if you're looking for a new game to add to your Sega CD collection, check out Hook for the Sega CD. Maybe it's on the shelf right now. So next time you're shopping your local retro video game stores or maybe at a video game convention, these are just a few games you can look out for that hopefully won't break the bank, and you're gonna have some fun with them. I know I have.